It's Ramon Kayla and Will, powered by All Four Seasons Garage Doors on 104.5 The Zone, talking Titans with you until 10 a.m. this morning. Ramon Foster, Kayla Anderson, and Will Bowling. Jonathan Schaefer making the show happen as we go to the Mark Spain Real Estate Hotline and check in with our friend Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus. Good morning, Sam. How are you?
Good morning, Sam.
Morning. I'm good, guys. How are you?
Good.
We're great, and we are still amazed that Derrick Henry has 219 yards and 193 after contact on Sunday against the Houston Texans. How do you put in perspective just how big of a performance this was for King Henry against a defense that knew he was going to get the ball on pretty much every play?
Yeah, huge. And obviously not just Henry. I mean, the Titans were able to run the ball pretty much at will, regardless of whoever was carrying it. Dontel Hilliard had a pretty good game as well. The Texans are bad. They've been in their defense. They haven't really started this kind of rebuild project. I know the people running the thing have been there for a while, but the entire franchise was kind of on pause while they figured out getting rid of Deshaun Watson. And once they finally, traded him away and got the trade haul, that's when they could finally kind of push start on this entire project. And they've had a lot of roster turnover, but almost none of the moves they've made over the last few years have been ones that are expected to be long-term things. They've just been kind of turning over the roster. I think this offseason is when we'll see the first year where they actually try and deploy some of that space, some of the money, some of the resources they have, and try and get better in a meaningful way. But it means that they're like the best or the worst team in the NFL right now, and it lets teams like Tennessee just show up and run all over them.
When it comes down to this defense, though, because they couldn't get anything going, I didn't think offensively, the Texans. There's a guy in particular I know, sacks is one thing. It's not really been his thing, but the last two games as far as Bud's concerned, how would you view that? Is that his role of, look, pressure, get to a guy, maybe get a sack, but it's probably advantageous for somebody else?
Yeah, I think the Titans are really good at scheming up pressure. For a few years, we've never graded their edge rushers particularly well. They've been able to get a lot of pressure. Guys like Harold Landry had a ton of pressure, which is usually not – sometimes when we grade guys badly, but they have impressive numbers, it's because their sacks are pretty high and everyone thinks they're doing a great job, but they're not actually getting a lot of pressure. Landry was weird because he always got a lot of pressure, but it's because he was playing 600-700 pass rushing snaps in a season. He was just always out there, and he'd get a lot of pressure because he had more opportunities than pretty much any pass rusher in the NFL. So the Titans are really good at scheming pressure without necessarily having a truly elite edge rusher in the group. Bud Dupree is kind of what he's always been, which is a spectacular athlete, but a guy who's not necessarily the best pass rusher in the world. But being an elite athlete means you're going to win some reps and cause problems and get pressure because you're a better athlete than the guy that's trying to block you a lot of the times. And you see it sometimes where Bud Dupree is able to do that. But the other thing he does is when they're able to scheme up free pressure, either free rushes or scheme him up against a back or a tight end, that's when being a super athlete really helps, right? Because all of a sudden you're able to make a bigger impact on those plays than a marginal athlete is when he's given an advantageous position because of what the rest of the defense is doing. So I think Bud Dupree he's like a useful part of that rotation and can definitely help the overall pressure rate of that defense and help cause problems for other people and definitely be a factor there. But yeah, he's never, I don't think, going to be an elite pass rusher, but he's certainly a useful part of what they're doing.
I look at the secondary sometime, like corner and safety, specifically corner, like an offensive line, like a player. No, I'm not championing the O-line here. I like to get with that sometimes, Sam. But it takes time to get to an elite status or a very solid starter. Is Christian Fulton heading in that direction right now?
Yeah, I think you're right. It does take time usually to get to that kind of level. It does take time to move in that direction. And the other way that it's like an offensive line is I think it's a weak link system where you need 4 or 5 guys that are all playing at a high level. If you've got one guy that's playing really well and everybody else stinks, your offensive line stinks, right?
Yeah.
Same with the secondary. If you've got one guy playing really well but everyone else is getting lit up, you have a bad secondary. I think Christian Fulton has definitely taken steps in the right direction. He's got a pretty good coverage grade so far this season. His numbers are much better than they've been in the past. He's giving up just a little over 55% of passes into his coverage are being caught. The passer rating is low. He's only given up, a couple of reasonably big plays. So I think he's definitely taken steps towards that high-end level. And certainly in the last few weeks, like his last 3 weeks have been night and day better than the first three. So if he continues on that trajectory, then like maybe the light switch has completely gone on for him.
It's probably kind of crazy to see the Titans with the number 2 seed right now in the AFC, and you look at the Titans on offense and really have not been able to get much going except for Derrick Henry, who you saw on Sunday have another extraordinary outing. Is that just hard to fathom sometimes? Like a team right now can be in the mix but have essentially not any offense?
This is such a strange season because, we looked at the offseason and there were all these teams that loaded up, that added players, that made what we thought would be seismic changes to their roster and were expected to be contenders. And so many of them just haven't been, like Denver. Denver was supposed to be in the Super Bowl mix because of Russell Wilson, and that thing has been a disaster so far. The Raiders, same idea with Devontae Adams. They've been even worse than Denver. But nobody's talking about it as much because they haven't been on primetime every week. But it means that a team like Tennessee, who's just kind of ticking along and then beating the teams that they're better than on their schedule, are able to knock off 4 or 5 straight wins and jump back up to the kind of top seeding in the AFC. I think they're a little bit like last year. I think this run of wins is a little bit of a mirage. They're not quite as good as that. They've just had a run of some teams that they should be expected to beat. But we know that this offense is capable of more than we've seen from them so far this season. They've had a lot of injuries to receiver. That's obviously a big factor in determining what your offense is capable of doing. But with Derrick Henry looking more like King Henry, with Ryan Tannehill being solid with that offensive line, I think slowly figuring things out as the season goes on. Again, the line has dealt with injuries. I think the Titans offense can definitely get better over the course of the season, which it will probably need to once they run into the better teams on their schedule.
Sam, when you look at running backs, you just mentioned Derrick Henry getting back into winter mode here. Coming off that ankle injury, it took him a little while to get back to being himself. And I don't know if anybody expected him to really get back to running angry like he has been. But when you look at other backs in the leagues, like where does he compare to these other backs right now?
Yeah, and again, I think a big part of that is the offensive line slowly coming together as well.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to separate what a running back is capable of doing from the blocking in front of them. And very few running backs are able to get any kind of consistent joy if they don't have capable blocking up front. Mm-hmm. But, if Derrick Henry continues playing the way he's playing, he's as good as any running back in the NFL. The top guys in PFF grading right now are Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs. Aaron Jones is right up there, even if he doesn't have the workload of some of those other guys. Same thing with Tony Pollard. He's right up there, even though he gets stuck in the back seat to Zeke Elliott. But then it's guys like Derrick Henry. Like he's right up back towards the sharp end of the PFF grades.
Sam Monson of PFF with us this morning on Ramon Kayla and Will. A team best 92.8 for Jeffery Simmons, despite only playing 38 snaps on a bad ankle on Sunday against Houston. What is it going to take for Jeffery Simmons to join that Defensive Player of the Year conversation and take that next step, you feel like, for this Titans defense?
Yeah, I mean, he's right up there right now. It's tough, I think, for a defensive tackle to win Defensive Player of the Year. And I also think Aaron Donald has kind of ruined it for everybody. He set such just a silly standard over the last few years that now, Chris Jones, Jeffery Simmons, Quinnen Williams, all these guys are having career years this season, but you get compared to Aaron Donald, and Aaron Donald is kind of right where they are this year, and it's a down year for Aaron Donald because he set this just absurd, unrealistic expectation over the last 2 years. So I think it's tough for one of those guys to win Defensive Player of the Year just because of that kind of perception in people's minds. But like Jeffery Simmons is playing as well as any defensive tackle in the NFL right now and is absolutely one of the best defensive players in the league, period.
Sam, Malik Willis was perfect 5 for 5 with a clean pocket on Sunday, but had a .8 passer rating when pressured. How do you evaluate his first start and performance against the Texans?
Yeah, it's tough. I think we saw in preseason just sort of how far away Malik Willis is from being a viable NFL passing quarterback in a conventional offense, right? Let's say that. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. We just know that he's not there. And if you're going to have him in as a starter when you need him, the offense is going to need to look different. It's going to need to be based off the run game. It's going to need to kind of prop him up and hope that he can function when kept clean and just sort of be a game manager. He reminds me a little bit of Taysom Hill right now, right? But the difference between the two of them is his upside is higher. Like, he's a young guy. He's not, 29 trying to figure out where he can go. He's 23 years old, and there's presumably an awful lot more in the tank. But right now, I think we're kind of looking at a guy who has a Taysom Hill type of skill set, which is he's a really high-end rusher. He's an incredible athlete. He can pass. He can, do some things in the offense, and you can definitely craft an offense around him as the quarterback that functions. But there needs to be more if you're going to be the long-term answer. And with Taysom Hill, there wasn't any more there, and that's why they kind of junked that plan and went in a different direction. But that, I think, just sort of shows what Malik Willis needs to do going forward. This is fine for now. This is fine for the short term. But if you're a long-term solution here, this is where we need to get to.
Sam, if available, man, where is this Titans offensive line? I'm sure pressures are high and, just where is it at run blocking, pass protecting pressures as far as league standing from you guys?
Yeah, I think the line is somewhere in the middle of the pack. It's tough because of the kind of flux that they've had and the changes of personnel that they've had. They're a better run blocking group than pass protection. Pass protection, they rank a lot lower in our rankings, which is kind of the way this line has been for years. It's strange that, there are certain lines in the NFL that are always better at one thing than the other. And maybe it's just the way that they focus on, it's a coaching thing. This is what they actually want to be as an identity. But Tennessee for years have been a better run blocking offensive line than they have been pass protecting. And I think that's why, when they really get into their groove, that's when Derrick Henry goes crazy and starts threatening rushing records and those kinds of things.
Okay, so this is more of a broad NFL general question here, but we know the AFC, for the most part, underperformed when it comes to AFC South. But overall, what is your team that has overachieved this year?
I think the Giants and the Vikings are two teams in the NFC that are sitting there with really good records, 6-1, 6-2, I think. I'm not sure either of them are really legit. The Giants in particular, I think, will definitely come back down to earth over the course of the season. The Vikings are actually setting themselves up to be in a great position. They're probably going to win the division now, barring catastrophe. So they're going to be in the playoffs, and they're going to have a chance. Obviously, once you get to the postseason, anything can happen. But it feels very difficult to envisage them beating one of the best teams in that conference once it gets to real playoff football. If they run into Philadelphia, certainly, if they run into Dallas when they're healthy down the stretch like that, unless they get better, I think they've overachieved with that record so far.
Speaking of which, Kansas City. Titans have them this week, man.
Yep.
What does Kadarius Toney do for them, and what are they minus Tyreek, and what the Titans got to look forward to seeing?
Yeah, Kansas City is still absolutely one of the best teams in the NFL. I think the three best teams in the league this year have been Buffalo, Kansas City, and Philadelphia.
Yep.
And the Chiefs have shown that Tyreek Hill is amazing, but Travis Kelce is still the number one receiver in this offense and always has been. Tyreek Hill gave them something special, but Travis Kelce was the guy that made it work and made the chains move and, allowed them to do everything. So Patrick Mahomes is playing in a different way this year. It isn't the deep shots. It's more patience. It's more of what makes Mahomes Mahomes, those kind of ad-libbed plays where he's running around, creating angles, making space over the middle, and then delivering the ball there. So guys like Juju Smith-Schuster have been huge additions to that offense. I love Kadarius Toney's skill set. I love what he can be in that offense. But, there's a reason that went south really quickly in New York. And I don't know that all of it is the Giants. This is Kadarius Toney has not necessarily covered himself in glory in terms of how he's been dealing with the whole situation. Kansas City, I think, is a good place for a guy like that to end up. They've had a pretty good record with taking in guys that haven't necessarily got the best history in the world in terms of attitude or in terms of off-field issues, and keeping them on the straight and narrow and maximizing what they can do well. In theory, if they can tap into Kadarius Toney's skill set, I mean, that's just a devastating combination.
Sam, on the way out, what is the panic level for the Indianapolis Colts right now, and how do you explain how badly that offensive line is underachieved despite being the highest paid group in football?
Yeah, I mean, it's full panic mode. When you're throwing at Sam Ehlinger for the rest of the season, just on the off chance he isn't terrible, like that pretty much tells you all you need to know about where the Colts are going this year. They're done. I mean, they're in real trouble. And yeah, that offensive line has fallen apart. And to be honest, it's been heading that way for a while now. Like they once had somewhere in the top 3 offensive lines in the NFL, but it's been steadily moving in the other direction over the last couple of seasons, and it has just completely fallen apart. Like they haven't had the kind of quality play they need from anywhere, really. And in particular, have had at least 2 real problem spots all throughout the season that they just haven't been able to patch up. And that has a knock-on effect to everybody. Like Quentin Nelson can't be Quentin Nelson while the guys either side of him are getting wrecked as well. So even he isn't playing at the best of his ability. It's been a complete train wreck for them.
Sam Monson has been our guest from Pro Football Focus at PFF_Sam on Twitter. Give him a follow there. We appreciate the time as always.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sam.
Absolutely. Sam Monson with us this morning on the Mark Spain Real Estate Hotline.